Good morning. So I'm going to, real quick, one of the things that we're seeing is that, and this is across the board, a lot of attendance in church is going down in all churches, all denominations. It's just one of the things that they say about our nation right now is that numbers coming together used to be like regular church attendance meant at least 3 times a month. And now if somebody attends like once to twice every 4, 5, or 6 weeks, they're like, I'm a church attender across the board. And so, and then especially in summers and things like that. And so one of the things that we're seeing that's been incredibly helpful is our online stuff. And I want to make sure that the team that's been putting together the videos and stuff like that, is anybody catching up with videos outside of the walls of the church? Like in the weeks that you're not here, is anybody, so the app and things like that. Here's what I want to encourage you to do. I battled with that personally for a while because I felt like it was self-promotion. And man, self-promotion is not something I'm drawn to. It's actually something that I feel repelled from. But what we're finding is that it is like in the 1950s, come to church with me was a very effective tool for how to reach your friends or your people. But what we're finding is your friends don't live next to you anymore. Your friends might live 5 states away, and the people that you stay in interaction with are not the one-on-one stuff. And so I'm softening on it. I'm kind of weakening a little bit. Like if there's a sermon or if there's something that's going on here that's online, feel free to share that and let people know. I think that's, I got 2 options. I can either be the grumpy old guy that's like, no, we're going to stick with this way because that's the way it's always been, or just I'm like, fine. If that's what works, just thank you for the involvement with that. So, okay, years ago, I learned this week that I have a phobia, and I learned that there's a name for this phobia. It's like if you want to, I'm going to get back to this. I watched a show a few years ago, and a lady's husband was sick, and they couldn't figure out what was going wrong. And so as they began to look, what they discovered is that this lady was poisoning him slowly, and and with antifreeze. And they're like, wait a minute. She had a husband a few years ago that died. Nobody knew why. He just got sick. And they, what's called exhumed, fun morning at church. They exhumed the body to re-examine. And they re-examined it because they wanted to know, is there something that we missed before we closed that chapter? So what had happened was they had buried him, they put flowers, the gravestone, it was done. It was something that in their minds, it was settled, it was over, and they had to go back and go, wait a minute, maybe there's more. And so when they exhumed him, what they found, sure enough, what do you think they found? They found antifreeze in his system also. Weird, I know, but if you'll follow me for a second, now think of this. They had buried something before the story was complete. They had put something away, they had covered it, it was over, but what they realized was there was more there than they had found, and they had to go back and start over. They had to exhume this situation, and what they found was that the story from beyond the grave told the story that solved the case for today, okay? Now, if you're wondering how this is going to turn into a sermon, it's going to take a while. I got to doing some research, and during the cholera epidemic in the 18th, 19th century, it gets worse. You thought it was weird already. There became this phobia, taphophobia, and it was the fear of being buried alive. So what they invented, the invention of what was called the safety coffin, and here's how a safety coffin is that we're pretty sure you're dead. We've all gotten together. We all agree you're probably dead. However, just in case, we're going to leave a string. Do your research. It's true. We're going to leave a string tied to your finger, and this string is then going to be tied to a bell. So that in the event that you're faking it, and you're not dead, and you wake up, you can ring the bell. Well, they quickly discovered that they had to cover the bell because otherwise the bell would start ringing in the wind. And sometimes it's true. You buried something that was dead. And so they had to cover the bell. But okay, all this to say this. I feel like that being raised in church, Sunday school from the time I was a little kid, I honestly think I've heard a sermon preached on everything in the Bible. It has been years since I read something and I thought, I didn't know that was in there. So I would say that that's like the first pass over the Bible, this just knowledge level of the Bible, that you kind of know what's in there. But what we have a tendency to do is, especially hearing it growing up, is we have a tendency to believe that we've got the concept, to believe that we've grasped the truth out of a story, and we bury it. So when someone says, we're going to talk about Noah, you're like, I know everything there is to know about Noah. And we bury it. And if we're not careful, what happens is pretty soon we become aware of the word, but closed off to the word. We don't examine it. We don't dig further into the truth. We believe that we've got the truth out of something and we've buried it. And I feel like that the series that we're starting today, I really feel like that in the last, I'm going to say probably the last 18 months, God has really challenged me to say, hey, wait a minute, just hang on a minute. I want you to go dig that story back up. Because there's a story to be told there that you haven't seen. And as long as I am so closed off to the possibility that there's more truth there, than what I am claiming is that the word is dead. If the Bible says that the word is living, that means we have to guard against the temptation to bury something that's still alive. Okay? So this week specifically, here's what got me. I felt like there was a bell ringing in my own life. I've heard the story of Jacob wrestling with God. Yep, got it. He wrestled with God. He hurt his hip. He limped. Got it. And it was like every time I'd go to the word, this story just kept coming to mind. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I quit. I give up. And it wasn't like I'd purposefully not gone and opened it. It's just I was thinking about it. I'm like, I'm aware of that story. But it just kept coming to mind. And it was like it was at the front of my spirit. And so I went and opened the word. And like any good preacher, I Googled, where's the story of Jacob wrestling with God? and I read it. And as I read it, I'm going to read it to you, and let me tell you what it did to me. I started reading it, and it was like the layers of this story began to fall open, and what I was left with, I was dumbfounded. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. I don't understand this story at all. This story doesn't make any sense. This story makes less sense than when I started. It's like I exhumed a story to find out that, wait a minute, there is life in this story that I have never considered. Let me read it to you. I'm just going to read it. Listen, I'm just going to read it to you in its entirety, and my guess is you're going to have the questions that I had, and then we're going to go back over it, and I'm going to show you what God has been walking me through on this story. Genesis 32, for you guys that were going to Google it, let me say Genesis 32, that's where it's found. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. It's a river. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all of his possessions. So when we find Jacob, he's sending everything across the river. So Jacob was left alone. Okay. Listen to how just casually the rest of this verse finishes. Listen to, like, Moses was the author of Genesis, and it's almost as though Moses wrote this while giggling, of like, no setup. As a storyteller, you want to kind of set the scene. You want to set the tone. You want the background. You want to feel like that when someone's telling you, any good storyteller will, when they're telling a story, you feel like that you're there. And Moses is like, what if I went the opposite approach? What if I left out all the details and just told you just what was happening? Listen to this. He was left all alone. Listen, a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Again, Moses doesn't care. I'm just going to write it and you go figure it out. The man asked, what is your name? Jacob, he answered. Then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. Jacob said, please tell me your name. But he replied, why do you ask my name? Then he blessed him there. Cool, good details, Moses. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, yet my life was spared. Full of questions yet? Yep. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Can we review? Jacob sent all his possessions across the river. He was alone. He wrestled with the guy till daybreak. He couldn't overcome him. The guy touched his hip. It fell out of socket. He said, let me go. Jacob said no. He said, what's your name? He said, Jacob. He said, what's your name? Don't you know my name? Jacob says, I wrestled with God face to face and I was spared. And then he limped off. Hallelujah. That is how it is written. I read that and I went, how did I ever think that I understood that story? I am made of questions. So I got to work on it. So Jacob was alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Was there a conversation? Was there like a, you better not, yes, I'm going to, yes, I will, no, you won't? I mean, was it an ambush? We don't know. And then there was a guy, and they wrestled all night till daybreak. You say so. Who approved the final edit on this? Because honestly, if I'm an editor and this is the story, I'm like, have you read this? But this bell, it's like this bell in my spirit is like, wait a minute. If it's there, why? Why is this written like this? If it's written like this, it's written like this on purpose. None of the details are there on accident. They're all left there on purpose. Okay. So the only way that you're going to understand the story is if you do what I did, and I'll do it with you, is that we've got to go back and go, oh, hold on. Who is Jacob? What's the situation? Why is he sending all of his possessions across the river, but he's staying on this side of the river? We got to go all the way back to the beginning. And in the beginning, Jacob was a twin. And in the womb, Jacob and his brother Esau were fighting so much that she went to the prophet and she said, I just want to make sure everything's okay because it seems not okay. It seems like they're fighting a lot. Is this normal? And the prophet says, no, this isn't good. They're going to be a handful. Says, okay, so then Esau, because remember, we're trying to learn who Jacob is. Esau is born first, and as he's born, Jacob has a hold of his ankle. So they did what seems like just an observation. They named him Heel Grabber. That just seems like what they noticed. Your name means something to you. And I don't just mean what you write with your signature. Your identity, the name you've given yourself means something. Maybe you were named after your grandfather. Well, that's only important if you know who your grandfather was. My grandma, she said that she had a little kid in her Sunday school class one time, and he said a bad word, and she's like, oh, we don't talk like that in here. And he goes, you don't understand, Miss Weaver, when me and my daddy, when we get mad, we just got to cuss. See, what he's saying is like, you don't know my name. You don't know who I am. My grandpa, he was wild, and that's what I'm named after, so I'm wild. See, your name means something to you. However you came about it, when you think of yourself, your name has meaning. Let me explain to you what Jacob's name meant. Yes, it meant heel grabber, but that's not all that it meant. The name Jacob meant to supplant, to circumvent, to assail, to overreach, to wrestle, to fight, and to deceive. Yay! His name meant if you turn your back on Jacob, he's going to get something of yours. And he's going to fight, and he's tough, and he's not going to give up. And when you're sleeping, he's scheming. And that had been his name from birth. So when he thought of himself, he didn't just think of the name Jacob. He thought of everything that name meant and everything that went on along with it. Let me prove it. His brother was a hunter. His brother's out hunting. He comes home and he's famished. And Jacob stayed in the city and was cooking. No judgment? No. Not law judgment? But his brother comes home and he's famished and he's hungry. And he says, I'm so hungry. Well, Jacob, what has Jacob been doing the entire time he's been alive? Scheming. So he says, I'll tell you what. This was a big deal back then. He says, you give me your birthright and I'll give you a bowl of soup. And Esau goes, well, I'm about to die anyway. What good is my birthright if I'm about to die? So Jacob stole or tricked or deceived or wrestled away a birthright that was rightfully Esau's from the beginning. And then it says that when his dad was old and senile and blind and deaf and about to die, he was going to give this blessing to Esau, this blessing of being the firstborn. And Jacob schemes up a plan. He puts wool on his arms so that he feels more hairy like Esau. and he tricks his father into giving him the blessing that was rightfully Esau's. Well, then he's afraid for his life. He takes off running. He's going to flee. So he goes and he lives with Laban. He has to work for Laban for 14 years because Laban tricked him. Because don't you know, when you live by the sword, there you go. His father-in-law, he tricked him, and he made him marry the one he didn't want. And he goes, what? He goes, yeah, but if you work for me 7 more years, I'll give you the one that you do want. So then, after all this, he steals from his father-in-law and his wives. In the middle of the night, he gathers up his wife and his father-in-law's belongings because he's Jacob. His name was becoming his how. His name was how he got what he needed. His name was how he accomplished the things he wanted to accomplish. His name was his how. And so in the middle of the night, he sneaks off, and now he's got all this stuff, and he's running, and he's about to come full circle. His life is in this place that we all come to where we go, my decisions have led me right back to where I started. He's about to have to go meet Esau, and he's convinced Esau is going to want to kill me. So what do I do? You know he's got a plan. It's Jacob. He's got a plan. You know he's going to have a plan. So he goes, I know what I'll do. I'll send out gifts. Send them out first. And then I'll send out my family. And I'll send out my nephews and my nieces. And maybe, just maybe, when Esau sees the family, if we've grown and things have changed, you know, by the time he sees me, maybe Esau will have softened. So he sends all of his belongings across the river. He says, go out there and you meet Esau because it's probably going to be a little mad at me. And I'll stay here and I'll wait. So when we pick up this story, Jacob is neck deep in this scheming, fighting, wrestling, deceiving thing that he has done from the beginning because Jacob's name was his how. And here's what's crazy. Your name is your how. You're like, oh, how could that be the case? Well, let me read it to you. Have you ever heard the saying that the means justify the end? The end justifies the means. Like whatever the end result is, justifies however you got there. Your name so often is a representation of your means. You see people who just pursue power. It's like they stay up at night and they scheme about power, how to leverage, how to get in a position of power, how to get in a position where they can make demands because through their power, they're going to get what they want in life. They're going to provide for themselves through their power, and they've named themselves power. Now, I'm not gonna pick on a specific gender, but let's just say hypothetically there were a gender that leaned at times towards their name being appearance. Don't, hang on. I'm not casting a wide net, but we've all known people who through their appearance, that is their means to get what they want. That is where their blessings come from. That is where their favor comes from, and they've named themselves appearance. What about work ethic, men? Thought I wasn't going to pick on you. I get what I want because I work harder. I get up earlier, I stay out later, and I work. And maybe if you worked like I worked, you'd have what I have. And we work, and we've named ourselves work ethic because that is our how. Our name has become our how, and we believe that we can provide for ourselves if we're just willing to work hard enough. We as people do exactly what Jacob had done. Jacob had just named himself cheater. So here's Jacob, and he's cheating yet again, and he's fighting, and he's wrestling, and he sends out all of his possessions. You know what I noticed about good con men? They're always likable. Isn't that crazy? They're likable, because if they weren't likable, they wouldn't be very good con men. That's just, I guess, for later. And isn't it funny that Jacob's kids later would deceive him into believing that his favorite son Joseph had been killed when really he'd been sold into slavery. Do you see how this just sort of always hovered around him? We'll get to that later. When Joseph needed something, he would turn to his name. When Joseph needed something, he would turn to his name. And you go, that sounds dumb. When you need something, if you're not careful, you turn to your name. Whatever name you've given yourself, that's where you tend to look. So if Jacob were to arrive the next morning and he's limping, people would have been like, maybe he owed somebody money. He's a fighter. It's just what he does. He's always been a fighter. This is just him. It wouldn't have been a surprise. But here's the problem, is this was the fight that rang a bell in Jacob's life. This was the fight that rang the final bell. Oh, that's such a good reference. Because the fighting and the bells, but that's not. This was the fight in Jacob's life that redefined everything. This would be the fight that that ended the fighting for Jacob. You know, there were several times in the Bible, and it's not as hotly debated as it used to be. It used to be debated, and I think now people are just kind of coming to the realization that there were times in the Old Testament that people believed that Jesus himself appeared to people. That it was Jesus himself. We always say messenger of God, and we always think angel. And every time you think angel, what do you think of? Be honest. What do you think of when you think angel? Wings. Everybody thinks of wings. Well, let me tell you something. If somebody shows up to me and they've got wings, I'm not like, oh, hi, regular normal guy. If it doesn't occur to me at first that you're a messenger of God, it's because you have the appearance of just a man. So we got to get past this idea that every time there was a messenger in the Old Testament, it had wings. And in fact, it says that Samson's mother argued with this guy, and then he was taken up, and then Samson's mother said, oh my gosh, we're going to die. We've seen God. Abraham, Elijah, a lot of opportunities, but here's the one that proves what I believe to be true, is it says that when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they got thrown into the furnace, it says, how many did we throw in there? And they said 3. And he goes, well, now I see 4, and one of them looks like, thank you. So it is probable that Jesus was present physically in the Old Testament. And if you want to disagree with that, that's okay, because it's going to make you go do some research. It's going to make you go dig some stuff up. So that's fine with me. So it stands to reason that when Jacob comes back across and he's alone, that he began to wrestle with Jesus. There's enough evidence to support with confidence that I could make the argument that Jacob began to wrestle with Jesus. And doesn't that sound like Jesus? He gets you alone. He pulls you away from a work situation. He pulls you away from toxic relationships. He puts you in rehab. He puts you in a safe place. He puts you in a place where you're disconnected from other things that used to cause comfort, and he places you somewhere that he can go, now that I've got you, we got to talk. We need to talk. It says they begin to wrestle. Isn't it funny to think of Jacob wrestling with Jesus? When the man saw, now this is going to cause questions, but we'll come back to it. When the man saw that he could not overcome him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip. Hold on. He could not, does that cause questions for you? Like he was wrestling with Jesus and Jesus could not overcome him? So he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched or dislocated as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, let go of me, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Okay. God is allowing Jacob here to fight through some lifelong struggles. Jacob probably couldn't put into words why he was fighting. He was fighting because that's who he was. It's this lifelong struggle. Life is bringing him full circle. Tomorrow he's going to meet his brother. Have you ever got to a place where it feels like you're just fighting life? You're just fighting everything in life. It doesn't matter what's going on. You're just battling against life. And through this course of this fight, what God is revealing is that your battle has never been with your brother. Your battle hasn't even really been with your name. From the beginning, Jacob, your battle has always been with me. Your struggle, your fight, your resistance, everything about this nature that you've carried from the beginning, it's been a battle with me. And now we're going to settle it. Now we're going to get it out. Now we're going to come to some healing. Now we're going to go dig up some things that you've buried, and we're going to examine them, and we're going to see if maybe there's life that's been buried that needs to be brought back, okay? So the problem is not, if you know Jacob, the problem is not, how do you get Jacob in a fight? It's easy, apparently, you just cross paths with him. He's just a fighter. He's just what he does, he fights. The question is not, how do you get Jacob to fight? The question is, anybody ever had kids? How do you get Jacob to stop fighting? An interesting thing happened when I got married. And again, when I became a father, but like there would be times when we first got married and Lacey would be like, hey, give me that. And I'm like, no. And she's got this thing that she'll do, and she'll admit it, but like if you're ever like, not angrily, like just playfully in a wrestling match, she has no self-preservation. None. And so what you find, husbands, if you're a good husband, what you better find is that you're not even wrestling anymore. You're trying to protect her from hurting herself. Like she'll jump and you're like, if I don't catch you, you're gonna land. So now you're not even wrestling. You're doing two things. You're wrestling, but you're protecting. Right? And then you become a father, and your kids, they just depend on the nothing bad could happen if you're wrestling dad. They could care less. They will jump off of the top bunk, and you're like, what's your plan? If I don't catch you, what are you doing? It says that the problem was not how do you get Jacob to fight, it's how do you wrestle with Jacob in a way that doesn't kill him. Because Jacob is so sold out to this fight that's in his life. It has become him. He doesn't have self-preservation to offer. And so God is in the middle of wrestling, and he's like, okay, all right, this isn't, okay. You know, here's what I've noticed about fighters is I grew up in a fun culture. And I remember one night, am I allowed to say this? I'm saying it. I remember one night we were at the bar in college. I've never claimed to be a saint for those years of my life. And a guy comes in, and his head's wrapped up. A buddy of ours that went to college with us, and he was a bull rider, and he'd gone to the hospital. And he shows up, but his head's still wrapped, and you can still see where the blood is soaked through the bandage. And they're like, how did you get him to let you go? And he's like, I didn't. I told them if they don't get out of my, and there it goes, fighters. There are people in the world that's just their name. Their name is fighter, and it's just who they are. And so God is wrestling with a fighter, and he's going, how do I get him to stop wrestling? It says this. It says that he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was dislocated. I've had hip injuries. I've had hip surgeries. I've got terrible hips. I'm like a German shepherd. You know the fun thing about being in your 30s and having hip issues? People are like, your hip? Really? How old are you? My grandma, did you trip over your cat? That's what happened to my grandma. And I'm like, no. I'm an athlete. Like, if it's your knee, people are like, oh, cool. If it's your elbow, or like, but no, hips, no. That's the uncoolest injury you can have. Sorry, Jacob. But here's what I learned in the course of all my fun hip issues, is that if you've ever watched fighting and someone has a knockout punch that doesn't really make sense, like it doesn't look like they hit very hard and they just put somebody out, it's because their power is located in their hips. When you're watching baseball and a guy just reaches out and barely touches a baseball and it somehow goes over the fence, what they now know is that your power as a person is located in your hips. So the problem was Jacob was so confident, and God goes, I've got to make you see what I see, and I'm going to do it gently, and I'm going to do it surgically. I'm going to kindly and lovingly expose to you what I see that you don't see, because Jacob said, I can do this forever. You want to fight? Let's go. Jesus says, I'm not going to overcome him wrestling with him. So what do I do? And he says he reached down, and what he said was, listen, this place that you derive power from, this place that gives you confidence that you can fight forever, I got to take that. And it's not to be mean, it's not to be punishing, it's so that you can see what I see, and it works. Let me show you what happened. He didn't touch his elbow. He didn't touch his knee. He didn't touch his ankle. He specifically spoke to the power that Jacob was clinging to. Verse 26, it says, then the man said, Jesus said, let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Let me tell you what's happened, is that all of a sudden Jacob sees this place of power, and it's gone. Someone who believed themselves to be attractive now sees themselves as unattractive. People who thought they were wealthy now see themselves as poor. All of a sudden, these values that we cling to that give us this confidence, it's gone. And Jacob's life is upside down, because Jacob can no longer stay Jacob if he doesn't have that power. He's not fighting anymore. He's clinging. He's clinging, and Jesus says, let me go. And he says, I can't. I could have let you go an hour ago. I could have let you go yesterday, but now that's gone. Now I don't know anything. Now my confidence is gone. I'm vulnerable. I'm powerless. I can't let you go yet. Not unless you are where I get my blessing. if my name is gone, I don't know where else I can go. He's seen the truth. So at his most vulnerable, defeated, powerless, alone moment, Jesus asks him the question, the final, last little death knell of this fight, is he asked him the one question he did not want to be asked. He says this, listen to this. Verse 27, the man asked him, "What is your name?" Man, at a time where he already feels completely exposed, Jesus says, "What's your name?" I think that's probably the question for this morning. Is what is your name? What name have you given yourself? Where do you go for your power? Where do you go for your security, for your sense of self-worth? Where do you go for that? What is it? The one thing Jacob didn't want to have to say was, my name is cheater. My name is deceiver. My name is all of these things that that's the one thing he didn't want to have to acknowledge. Jesus says, "What is your name?" There couldn't have been a more specific question that struck right to the heart of Jacob's issue. And he says this, he says, "There is a bell ringing above your name." You've buried your name. You've accepted it as true. You've stopped considering that there could be anything different about who you are, but there's a bell ring. There's something down there. Go get it and bring it to me. Go get your name and bring it to me. What is your name? And there, you know that Jacob is there, because if this was just a normal conversation, Jacob would go, "Okay, now hang on. I'm going to tell you my name, but first let me finish. Don't judge me. My name is Jacob, but hang on." Jacob said what they both knew. He said one word. So what is your name? He said, "Jacob." It was one word, but it was a lifetime of stories and hurts and betrayals and inferiority complexes. Everything that had been wrong with Jacob's life came flooding to the surface with one word, and Jacob said, "This is who I am." It would be interesting if we could ask Jesus, what bell is ringing in my life? What have I buried as true in my life that isn't true? Where am I going for power? Where am I going for blessings? Where am I going? What have I accepted to be true about myself? Where are the areas that you want to do a work in my life? We can't get there unless we're willing to consider that maybe somewhere along the line we buried something that's still alive. Verse 28 says, "Then the man said, 'Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and you have overcome.'" Hold on. We're not out of the woods yet. We're close. How can you say that you've overcome? You wrestled with God and you overcame. I'm limping. I don't have any power. I've lost my name. He never quit and walked away. The only way that you overcome is by losing. That's it. You remember when the word says that unless a man lays down his life, unless a man hates his own life, unless a man is willing to lay down and die, unless in the baptism we die and we're resurrected, it says you didn't overcome because you beat me up. Because you can't. It says you overcame because you lost and you stayed. That's what it looks like to wrestle with God with something in your life and go, whatever the outcome, I'm not leaving. Whatever the outcome, I'll accept what you've got for me, but I can't leave because I came in with confidence, but it was based on a false premise. It was based on a name that I don't even have anymore. And he said, "I'm going to name you the name of my people." He said, "You're a new creation." Now listen. There are times where I can hear somebody has said something and I'm like, that sounds just like them. I got a buddy in Mississippi and he says, "How are you doing?" And he says, "Every time, every day like a holiday." If you were to tell me that somebody said that, I go, "Oh yeah, Carol Duran." Sometimes you hear something and you're like, that sounds just like them. So listen to this. Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." Jacob's still a fighter. "You want to know my name? What's your name?" But he replied, "Why do you ask me my name?" Doesn't that just sound like Jesus? Doesn't that just sound like Jesus when Jacob goes, "What's your name?" And he goes, "Why are you asking my name?" you know who I am. Proof of the fact that he knew who he was is he said, I struggled with God. I saw God face to face and my life was spared. So Jesus says, you know who I am. So he blessed that place and called it Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, yet my life was spared. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his limp. Here's the question. Why was he still limping? He comes out of this and he's still limping. He's still different. He's still changed. He's still, in a physical sense, broken. He's still, from a financial stance, poor. He's still, from an appearance standpoint, no longer attractive. He is, from a wisdom standpoint, now unintelligent. Like everything that he placed his power on is still taken and he's still limping. Why? Why is he still limping the next day after he has come to this realization that I dug up my name and I got a new one? God didn't say you have to stop wrestling. He didn't say you have to stop scheming. He didn't say you have to stop working hard and being tough and being a fighter. He says, I'm not robbing everything from your personality, but from now on, it will be to my benefit instead of your detriment. Your name will take everything that's good about you, and that gets to stay, but you no longer have to be chained to everything about your name that's negative and that's doing you damage and that's doing you harm. He says, why am I still limping? You're still limping so that you are never tempted to go back to an old power source. So that you're never tempted to forget what we've done here. So that you're never tempted to think, maybe, just maybe, I can go back to my old life. You have become a new creation. We have dug up the old. We've settled it. We've reburied it. And you are now a new creation. And the limp is a reminder that the power never came from your hips. Your power, your blessing, it didn't come from your name. Your blessing didn't come from your fighting. Your blessing didn't come from your appearance, from your power, from your image, from all the things that we do. Your blessing and your power always came from me, and you've wrestled with that, and now you've accepted it, and now you'll never forget it. Let's pray. God, personally, I want to just say thank you for bringing that story back. Sorry for the years, I guess the years that I spent thinking I understood it. God, I know this. I know that everybody gets a name. Everybody has a name that they're carrying around. Everybody has an identity that they carry with them. Everybody has something that they believe to be true about themselves. And Lord, my prayer is this, is that you guide us, you bring us, you lead us to the areas where there's bells ringing above things that were buried, things that we just accepted to be true that are no longer true about us. God, show us the areas in our life where you have called us to be a new creation, where we're allowed to wrestle, we're allowed to struggle. God, I don't think anybody ever takes on a new identity without struggling through that. But God, what overcoming looks like is that we don't leave when we lose. That we accept the loss of the things that we used to value. We give those up, we let you have them, and we don't walk away. God, show us the areas where we've gone in the past for our blessings and for our power. Expose those in a way that allows us to see, God, it's always been you. Our battle has always been with you being in control of our lives. And that our blessing and our power always has got to come through you. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.